focus of this study is just one biblical text, and that is unique in the whole New Testament. As you know, that chapter 13 of the book of Revelation concludes with verse 18, which actually gives a call to the readers of the book of Revelation to figure out the number of the beast. And that number is defined as 666. And if you have your Bibles open, if you can here join me, you will see that actually this text begins with a call for wisdom. It says, "Here is the wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. So you can see that actually the text begins with a call for a special wisdom. In order to calculate this number, a special wisdom and understanding is needed. Actually, we want to underscore at the very beginning that the wisdom that is in view here does not refer to some brilliant intellectual ability, or some Christians, some interpreters of this number actually even they think that this is a call for special mathematical skills in order to calculate this number. No, actually, in the context of the Bible, this is a call for the divine discernment, special wisdom that can be imparted to the believer only through the Holy Spirit. That's the wisdom of which Solomon talked when he said, "The Lord gives the wisdom," in Proverbs 2:6. James tells us that if we ask God for wisdom, he will readily give it to us. James chapter 1, verse 5. But it appears that this reference to the wisdom and understanding here in this text actually refers to Daniel chapter 12. If you go to that chapter, we will see that Daniel was told to seal the prophetic part of his book, a prophetic part that actually talks about persecution of God's people by the Antichrist powers until the time of the end. And then Daniel was told that at the time of the end, that prophetic portion of his book will be unsealed. Daniel was told that actually the knowledge will increase and people will get understanding of those prophecies. They will be purged, purified, and refined, but the wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand. So many Christians, as they read Daniel chapter 12, verses 9 and 10, they understand these words that the knowledge will increase. They think that this is a knowledge of technology, of science, everything that we witnessed today. But actually, Daniel here refers to the knowledge of and the understanding of the biblical prophecies. That God's people will come to that true understanding of those prophecies that were sealed in the book of Daniel and revealed through the book of Revelation. So, Revelation 13:18, that call for wisdom, reflects on that passage from Daniel, telling us that God's end-time people will need that divinely imparted wisdom in order to discern the deceptive character of the end-time apostate system in order to be protected from the end-time deception. One more time, this call for wisdom is found in chapter 17, verse 9, and deals with the same end-time apostate and deceptive system. But then we read, and that's what Apostle Paul makes very clear in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 10 to 12, that all those who lack this wisdom will become the victims of this end-time deception. So, if the book of Revelation puts so much emphasis in the understanding of this number, so it is necessary to take few moments and ask a question and try to give the answer to that question. And the question is, then what is the meaning of this number 666, which is so mysterious that only those who have that divinely given wisdom will be able to understand. It's important to keep in mind that throughout the Christian history, many attempts have been made to identify an individual or the system behind this number 666. And the popular method that was used in order to decipher that number was a technique known as gematria. From the word gematria actually comes the word geometry. And gematria simply means manipulation with the numbers. What are we talking here about? See, before the invention of the Arabic numbers and the numerals, the letters of Hebrew and also Greek and Latin alphabet, they had the numerical value. Just to simplify it, for instance, A would mean 1, B 2, C 3, D 4, and etc., etc. And through this method of gematria, for instance, the numerals from person's name or title of certain people have been added. So the letters of alphabet, they were replaced into the numerals, they were added, calculated, in order to get the number of that name. So the same practice was to take certain names and the titles of certain systems. The letters of alphabet were replaced with the numerals in an effort to see if behind that name was found the number of 666. And we must mention here that as a result, all kinds of speculative proposals have been made throughout the Christian history with the attempt to detect or to discover personal systems behind this number. And we must say that almost every generation of Christians applied the number 666 to its own time. And this brings us to the 17th century, when the German Lutheran Protestant, who was the same way the classic scholar by name of Andreas Helwig, after many attempts, he finally discovered the numerical value of the number 666 in the Latin inscription Vicarius Filii Dei. If you want to translate it to English, simply means vicar of the Son of God. Helwig assumed that this was the title of papacy, and if it was not the title, so it was just one of the reference to papacy that clearly contained this number 666. He actually published a book with his proposal. That book was in German. Eventually it was translated into English. It came into the hands of Uriah Smith, who read it, became excited about this, and he readily accepted this view and popularized it among early Adventists in his commentary on the book of Revelation. And very soon, our pioneers embraced that interpretation. It is very interesting that Ellen White, in her writings, never referred to Vicarius Filii Dei in order to interpret this cryptic number 666. I must say, and as we will explain later, that actually Vicarius Filii Dei has the title of papacy, which actually gives the number 666, has never been the official position of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And for certain reasons. Because the interpretation of the number 666 within this concept, Vicarius Filii Dei, is problematic for many different reasons. We want just to mention few of them. Number one, there is no any documented evidence that Vicarius Filii Dei has ever appeared on the papal tiara or mitre. Although occasionally, only occasionally, in the past history, some popes were referred to as Vicarius Filii Dei, there is no any evidence that Vicarius Filii Dei has ever been the official papal title. Actually, if you go to Vatican, you will see the Sixtine Chapel there. You will have the names of all popes from the first one until the last pope today. You will see all the names. And the title that is always associated with the names, it's expressed with the abbreviation PM, which actually means Pontifex Maximus, as translated into English, which means the supreme priest. So we don't have any evidences. Next, nowhere in the book of Revelation gematria is used or pointed to as a method of calculation. Numbers in the book of Revelation regularly have a symbolic meaning. For instance, After 13:18 in the Revelation, we move immediately into the following chapter 18 and verse 1, where we read that 144,000, they have the name of God on their foreheads. So verses 1 to 3. But I hope you will agree with me that this does not give a call for a mathematical calculation of the name of God, but actually for the spiritual understanding of the divine name. We want to mention a few more problematic reasons. The text 13:18 does not specify the language in which the name of the beast occurs. Whenever in the book of Revelation the name is specified with a special meaning, regularly the language is specified. For instance, chapter 9 verse 11 and 16, it clearly says that name with symbolic meaning is in Hebrew. Or if you go chapter 9 verse 11, it clearly states that symbolic meaning of that name must be understood in Greek. Always the name is specified. However, what is clear, that Latin is never used in the book of Revelation. There is no any indication that the number 666 should be decoded in this language. If the meaning of the name of the beast is supposed to be found by the numerical value of the letter that are put together, summed together, the language would be clearly specified as in all other cases in the book of Revelation. And just to mention the final argument, Revelation 13 shows that the number 666 applies exclusively to the time of the end, not before. Please, I'm inviting you that you open chapter 13 and you will see that verse 18 actually is the conclusion of the whole section, starting with verse 11, going all up to 17, which clearly indicates that this number 666 has a special meaning only in the context after the healing of the deadly wound of the beast. As it is described that the lamb-like beast causes the inhabitants of the earth to receive the mark of the beast, consisting of the name of the beast or of the number of this beast. It is in this context of this end-time scenario that God's people are called to figure out the meaning of this number in order to perceive the true nature of the beast as to be deceived. Please let me explain here. Many people, by reading English translations where the word calculate is used, assume here that mathematical enterprise is here involved. It's calculation of numbers. But in Greek, the word actually should better be translated as who has wisdom to figure out the meaning of this number, of the name of the beast. It's the same word that is used in the Gospel of Luke when Jesus mentioned that a person would like to build his house, he first has to figure out the cost. This is the same word that is used here. Or as Jesus mentioned, if a king goes to wage war, to fight against another kingdom, he should first figure out if he is able to win that war. This is the same word that is used here. So the call is to figure out, not really about the mathematical calculation. And if any application of the number 666 to some historical personalities or the medieval Latin inscription Vicarius Filii Dei is intended, I just want to tell you, it does not fit the end-time context. Whenever Seventh-day Adventist interpreters try to show that Vicarius Filii Dei applies to papacy, they always point to centuries earlier, even to the medieval period, that some of popes, they claim Vicarius Filii Dei. But actually this does not fit the historical and literary context of this text. Because 666, it fits only the end time context, after the healing of the deadly wound of the beast, when the inhabitants of the earth will be forced to accept the mark of the beast to be put on their foreheads or on their right hand. So if Vicarius Filii Dei is not in view here, then what is the meaning of the number 666? Please, I'm asking you that you look again here into the text. And after the call for the wisdom and understanding to calculate the number of the beast, the text clearly specified that this is the number of a man. It says in my New American Standard Bible. The word that is translated here as a man, number of a man, actually in Greek it's arithmos anthropo, which really rightly should be translated as the number of humanity. The Greek word anthropos can refer to certain individuals, human individuals, but the primary meaning is humanity. It's a reference to human beings. And this is the meaning here in this text. Like in Revelation 22:17, when we have a similar expression where it talks about metron anthropo. Metron, it simply means a measurement. But anthropo does not talk about the measurement of one man. It simply means according to the human measurement. Because the beast of Revelation chapter 13 does not refer to a human person to appear at the time of the end. Whether you call him Antichrist, whatever you want, as evangelical Protestants understand, the book of Revelation actually points to a religious political system, not one single person, because the book of Revelation does not deal with individual, with single person, single human beings, but with apostate, in this context, religious political system that at the time of the end will stand in opposition to God. So it appears that the best way to understand the number 666 is from the spiritual perspective. In what way? 7 in the Bible is the divine number. We don't have a time to talk about that, and that's a well-established fact in the Bible. And that's number regularly used with reference to God, His activities, and the heavenly realms. Number 7 expresses the perfection of God in the heavenly realities. That's number 7. But number 6, it's one short of 7, and as such represent humanity falling short of the divine perfection. And the best way to understand it, that the fact that the human beings were created on the 6th day, which is actually one day before the completion of the full week of the 7 days of the creation week. So the human beings were created in the 6th day. And in order for the human beings to find their purpose, and that they have a fellowship and the union of the divine, they can find it only in the number 7, in that Sabbath rest, as they acknowledge God as their creator and their redeemer. So in such way, the number 666 as this triple number defines the humanity apart from God. And this is evidently the best understanding which has the Old Testament background. Number 666, it's found in 2 other places in the Bible, in particularly in the Old Testament. One of those occurrences, it's not significant at all. It's used with the references to the numerical number that is found among many numbers to describe certain things. But the second time is actually found in 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 14. Well, if you have your Bibles, if you open it, you will see that the number 666, it's found in 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 14. And usually the casual readers, they don't see any connection between these texts in the book of Revelation. If you open 1 Kings chapter 10, we will read in verse 14 that the annual income of King Solomon is defined in the terms of 666 talents of gold. As you know that Solomon was once faithful to God. He was humble. And God blessed him. But then eventually, Solomon turned away from God. He actually did not build his dependence on God, but started relying upon himself. He departed from God, and he started accumulating for himself gold in his palace, multiplying chariots and horsemen, and bringing many foreign women for himself. And as you know, that this was clearly in violation of God's instruction to the Israelite kings, as recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 17, 16 to 17. As Moses instructed to the people of Israel, that their kings will not do it. If they do it, it will mark their self-exaltation about other people, which would lead them to apostasy. So the purpose of this law was to keep the Israelite king from pride and exaltation about the people over whom they ruled. So, in disobeying the divine instruction, King Solomon completely turned away from God. He became filled with pride and arrogance, and he turned to serve images of gold, thus leading people away from God. We know that history of Solomon. And it is in this context that we have a statement that all his success is summed up. All his achievements is summarized in terms of the number of 666. All those achievements in prosperity, Solomon ascribed to himself his power, his wisdom, and his mind. Even today, even though the Solomon humbly asked God to give him that wisdom, we even today refer to the wisdom of Solomon. Even the very temple that he built to God's glory, and you remember during the dedication prayer, when he said that this temple, this house, will be called by your name, actually became as a token of his pride and arrogance. And evidently this is the Old Testament background to the understanding of this number of the beast as 666 in Revelation 13:18. In such way, it points to the human system that has turned away from God, full of arrogance and pride and self-exaltation, the system that is truly in the service of Satan. Let me repeat one more time. The number 666 in such way points to this rebellious system that stands in opposition to God, exalts itself above God, and claims the titles and prerogatives of God. And that's why the number 666 that refers to that title of this rebellious system points to the system that stands in the service of Satan. It demands worship of the people in the world for itself in place of God, as numerous texts, for instance, Revelation 13:6-8 points, and also Paul affirms in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 4. As we saw earlier, this system points to the apostate Christianity that, like Solomon, was one faithful to God, but eventually turned away from him. At the time of the end, this system, very similar to Solomon, will lead people away from God, will side with Satan, persecute those who choose to remain faithful to God, be obedient to him in keeping his commandments. Few more things should be mentioned here at this point. It is particularly significant that the number 666 refers not one particular entity, but it refers to the sea beast in the association with the lamb-like beast, led and orchestrated by Satan. So we are talking about the counterfeit Trinity, satanic Trinity, that counterfeits the Trinity of the Godhead. In such way, the number 666, especially in Greek, consists of a triple 6 that is clearly expressed with Greek as hexakosioi, hexakonta hex. You will notice here, it's clearly we have 3 hexes. This threefold 6 in Greek identifies this satanic triune league, the dragon, the sea beast, and the earth beast, as the counterfeit of the Trinity of God as specified in the book of Revelation chapter 1, verses 4 to 6. These 3 associates, this Trinity, comprises the end time religious system, which is in the book of Revelation named as Babylon, after the ancient Babylon in the Old Testament, which was the earthly power that stood in opposition to God, to true God, and tried to control the world. From its very beginning, Babylon stood as the incarnation of the godless power in opposition to God. And Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 to 14, that we usually read as the exaltation and fall of Lucifer. Actually, you can see clearly in verse 4 that this is primarily a reference to Babylon, who stood as a symbol of Lucifer and his behavior. So the meaning of number 666. It's the number of Babylon. We know that number 6 was very significant and important to the Babylonian system. The ancient Babylonian counting system was based on so-called sexagesimal system, based on the numbers 6 and 60. That number later became lost, even though we still today use the Babylonian measurement of angles, 90, 180, and 360 degrees, and also we still practice the Babylonian counting of time. You remember 60 seconds, 60 minutes, and 24 hours. What today in Europe is metric system, and we have here United States, we have a measuring system. Okay, in ancient Babylon, the system was based on 6 and 60. But in addition to this measuring system, like in ancient Israel, the number 7 had also religious significance. The same was in ancient Babylon. It had a religious significance. It was the number of the chief gods of the Babylonian pantheon. And this explains why the statue that the king Nebuchadnezzar raised and requested all the officials to come and to worship that statue was 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. And why those 3 young men refused to fall down before the statue? This was not simply an act of the political allegiance to the king. Most likely that those young men would not have a problem with that. But it was associated with the Babylonian gods. So to fall down before that image, it had religious significance and meaning. And evidently, all of this that we just covered from the Old Testament defines the theological meaning of the number 666 as the Babylonian number. And no wonder that the dragon, the sea beast, and the earth beast, this trio, in the book of Revelation, it's called a Babylon. And the number of these trio, Babylonian trio, satanic trio, it's expressed with this triple number 6 in the book of Revelation, which really defines this end time system as the humanity rebelled against God, which is defined by this number 666. So this number refers to this end-time system that will cause the people at the time of the end to side with Satan and worship the beast that experienced the healing of the deadly wound. All those who receive the mark of the beast, consisting of the name of the beast and the number of that name, all those who side with that system, which, like Babylon of old, exalt itself about God in trying to take place of God in this world, will be the recipients of this number. However, the message of the book of Revelation, chapter 13, verse 18, is that this end-time system, it's nothing more than a human institution, counterfeiting God, the three persons of the Godhead, yet falling short of the divine character. And God's message to this system is the same message that was sent to the king of Tyre through the prophet Ezekiel in the Old Testament, who claimed to be God, claimed to be equal to God. But the message to that king of Tyre was, but you forget that you are just a man and you are not a God. You see, such an identification of this end-time, antichrist power and system requires divine wisdom and discernment, instead of, as many people think, some intellectual cleverness and calculation. At the end, we have actually to respond to few more questions that usually people are asking me. Many people are contacting and asking me, says, why has our church, Seventh-day Adventist Church, has changed its position on the interpretation of the meaning of this number in Revelation 13:18. Please, I want to make very clearly that the Seventh-day Adventist Church never had an official position on this issue until the year 1918. The earliest interpretation of number 666 among our pioneers was that actually the beast symbolized papacy. So the number, in understanding of our pioneers, the number 666 was understood as the number of the Protestant churches that would, in their view, side with papacy. Very soon, our pioneers, they actually realized that there were more than 666 Protestant denominations, so they abandoned that view. According to the statement of James White, referring to Ellen White in the earliest article known as The Word to the Little Flock, it appeared that Ellen White shared the view of our pioneers. However, very soon, she gave up to that view. And it's very interesting that in her writings, she never refers to the Vicarius Filii Dei in order to interpret the number 666. Never. Some Seventh-day Adventists, they think that the most important thing in the whole book of Revelation, the most important thing is to understand the meaning of the number of 666, especially as Vicarius Filii Dei. We all agree with that. There will be one person who disagreed, and that was the Ellen White. She never interpreted that number, which really shows that for Ellen White, that number was not as important as many of us assume, or she simply tacitly admitted that we don't have an understanding of the meaning of that number. We already explained that the Vicarius Filii Dei view actually came from non-Adventist sources, in particularly from Helvig. If you remember, we already mentioned it, from Andreas Helvig. His book came into the hands of Uriah Smith, and he promoted it among early Adventists. And through his commentary, actually, that interpretation was accessible and was adopted by most of Adventists. The question is, if this is really the correct interpretation, I'm repeating one more time, if this is the correct interpretation, and Ellen White knew about the view that was held by our pioneers, starting with Uriah Smith, the question is, why didn't Ellen White, in great controversy, implemented that interpretation? Why she did not include such interpretation into her most important book on the final events? If this is so much important, and if this was the correct interpretation. Please, it's important to mention that after Seventh-day Adventists widely accepted the view Vicarius Filii Dei that was really offered to Adventists through the commentary of Uriah Smith, many problems escalated with that, especially when Uriah Smith, in his original writing, in his commentary, actually made the statement that the Vicarius Filii Dei was inscribed on the papal tiara, and even in some of his writings he mentioned that the eyewitnesses actually claimed that they saw this inscription on the papal tiara. General Conference was under the pressure to provide the answer. And evidently, the leaders of the church did not have the answer. All that was made was that it came from Uriah Smith. And just to make a long story short, in 1905, the General Conference sent a delegation to Vatican to find the answer. After some difficulties, the delegation found the way to get into the room with the tiaras, papal tiaras. And they encountered several surprises. Which one of those surprises was that actually there was not the papal tiara? They realized they were papal tiaras, that each pope who would sit on the papal throne would actually make for himself a tiara. At the time of his death, his tiara was put into the window, and the next pope would make a new tiara for himself. That was the first surprise. The second surprise, the General Conference delegation discovered, was they carefully examined all the tiaras, and they could not find a single inscription, Vicarius Filidae, on any of those tiaras. And if you want to read for yourself, you can go to internet and you go to the archives of General Conference and read about that in Review and Herald periodical, July 27 of the year 1905. You will read there the whole report provided by the delegation of General Conference upon their return from that visit to Vatican. So in 1950s, the church produced the first biblical commentary. And of course, in interpreting the book of Revelation in chapter 13, verse 18, this is the interpretation that you can find in Seventh-day Adventist Bible commentary. Inasmuch as this commentary identifies the beast as the papacy, it also accepts this view as being the beast thus far presented, thou recognizing that there may be more implied in the cryptogram than its interpretation provides. They said, we as a church, at this present moment, hold this view with reference to this number, but we admit that in this cryptic number, there is much more than actually the knowledge of we possess today. So the Seventh-day Adventist commentary simply stated about the current position, okay? And it was, we have to keep in mind that Seventh-day Adventist Bible commentary was written at a special time when the church was struggling with understanding of many texts of the book of Revelation at the time when the church did not have any official position on this interpretive issue. And the turning point came in 1980s. The General Conference commissioned the committee consisting of Adventist scholars to do careful examination of the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation's prophecies. This group, if you are familiar with that, was named as DARCOM, which is abbreviation for Daniel and Revelation Committee. It was for the first time that actually Seventh-day Adventist Church distanced itself from the traditional interpretation, okay, Vicarius Filidae, and turned to the spiritual interpretation of number 666, which is much reflected in the exposition that I have actually provided in this presentation. This position was affirmed in the Sabbath School Quarterly of in 2002, second quarter, spring quarter, was the church really distanced itself publicly from the traditional interpretation. You can read about that. So Sabbath School Quarterly, okay, spring, second quarter, 2002, and you can in particular read the Sabbath School lessons on Thursday and Friday, July 6 and July 7. And detailed interpretation of the number of 666 that is currently accepted by Seventh-day Adventists actually is found in my commentary on the book of Revelation. I hope that this actually gives answers to the questions that many Adventists are asking about the traditional interpretation of 666 by Seventh-day Adventists, and any misunderstanding actually that the church has changed its position. I have here to take few more minutes to address another issue. If there is no evidence of the description Vicarius Filii Dei on the Pope's tiara, many people are asking the question, where then did the pictures with the alleged inscription Vicarius Filii Dei on the papal tiara come from? Instead of me providing the answer, please just allow me. I have in my hand a photocopy, as you can see, an article that was written by Ministry magazine, okay, that was provided in the November issue, Ministry magazine, in the year 1948. That article was particularly directed to Seventh-day Adventist pastors and evangelists. And that's why this article was published in Ministry magazine, which is actually a journal for Seventh-day Adventist pastors. Please now allow me, word by word, that I read at this moment, at this point, actually is reading that article from Ministry magazine. One more time, November 1948. The title is Dubious Pictures of the Tiara. The article begins with a question: is there any genuine picture of the papal tiara bearing upon it the inscription Vicarius Filii Dei, which some of our evangelists show on the screen in discussing the mark of the beast? And the answer that is given by the editors and by the church, Ministry magazine, they say, each pope, like any other sovereign, has his own tiara, which is the papal crown. There is therefore no one tiara that is worn by the full succession of papal pontiffs. Moreover, personal examination of these various tiaras, they refer here to the General Conference delegation to Vatican, by different men back through the years, and a scrutiny of the pictures of many more have failed to disclose one engraved with the inscription Vicarius Filii Dei. There is none such definitely known to exist. As heralds of truth, we are to proclaim the truth truthfully. No fabrication should ever becloud our presentation of truth. The present truth of the threefold messages is so overwhelming in its logical appeal and so inescapable in its claims that it needs no dubious evidence or illustration to support it. Recourse to any unreliable and fraudulent evidence discounts the very message that we are commissioned of heaven to give to man and reflect upon the honesty of the messenger. And now I'm asking you to pay special attention to the following. Years ago, one of our prominent evangelists, when in Rome, evidently as a part of General Conference delegation, secured some impressive pictures of one of the papal tiara. But the photographs were without any wording of any sort on any one of the three crowns, front or back. Later, an artist, in attempting to re-illustrate one of our standard books on the prophecies, took these genuine photographs of the plain tiara and lettered upon it the three words Vicarius Filii and Dei, one on each of the three crowns, on the premise that such was the name of the Pope. And if it were not actually on the tiara, it might well be by the way of illustration. One of our leading publishing houses and General Conference, to whom the altered photograph we can say forged photograph was submitted, emphatically rejected it as misleading and deceptive and refused to allow its use. All honor to them. Regrettably, some of our evangelists who do not have all the facts and to whom the appeal of the moment has sometimes outweighed the ethics of the case, and who perhaps have not thought through the fraudulent character of such plausible but specious evidence, have occasionally continued to use this or similar fabrication. And when I was young pastor, I witnessed such a use by our evangelists, and even maybe I myself used those pictures. And Ministry Magazine concludes this article saying, in the name of truth and honesty, this journal protests any such use by any member of the Ministry Association of the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, our worker body of which the ministry is the official organ. Truth does not need fabrication to aid or support it. Its very nature precludes any manipulation or duplicity. We cannot afford to be party of any fraud. The reflex action upon our own souls should be a sufficient deterrent. We must never use a quotation or a picture merely because it sounds or looks impressive. We must honor the truth and meticulously observe the principle of honesty in handling of evidence under all circumstances. Friends, this is the truth about the meaning of the number 666. And this is the reality of the pictures that were used at our evangelistic meetings. I hope that this presentation actually answers some questions that many people are raising, and I have been asked in the course of my academic career by many Adventists, different parts of the world. So I would like to conclude just with a note of observation. That some of us who actually, instead of going to check the evidences for themselves, immediately and readily try to express their disagreement or to post some fancy opposite interpretation, which actually they find by different individuals posted on internet. Brothers and sisters, for some of us, it's very hard to read off our favorite idea, which actually is just a matter of tradition. And for some people, that tradition has become for them the Bible. And for some of those people, if somebody touches their favorite interpretation, some people are even ready to disagree with the Bible. I understand it's very hard to read off the tradition. But we Seventh-day Adventists do not hold something because of our tradition, because certain people believe that, spread it, preach about that throughout Seventh-day Adventist history. What we believe something because it is founded and based on a clear and careful biblical evidences. And what you have just listened in this presentation, this is based clearly on the Bible. And I just want to ask you, we Seventh-day Adventists, we believe that we are not a part of many movements among different churches. Because much what they believe and much what they teach comes from many different sources, not from the Bible. Unfortunately, when we come to this concept and to this question and understanding of 666, many Adventists actually walk into the footsteps of many religious organizations. Believing that, hold it, they try to defend it because of the tradition. We are the people of the Bible. We have to stick to the Bible. Clearly stick to the biblical teaching. And the Bible should really provide us with the interpretation, anything what we believe, want to accept, and what to preach as the gospel message to the world who really should be warned of the soon coming of our Savior Jesus Christ in power and glory. May God bless each one of us.